From the table of my memory, I'll wipe away all trivial fond records, all saws of books, all forms, all precious past that youth and observation copied there. And thy commandment all alone shall live within the book and volume of my brain, unmixed with baser matter. Yes, by heaven! Oh, most pernicious woman.
I was cast as Hamlet in the Royal Shakespeare Company to play in Stratford-upon-Avon in 2008, it would have been. Gregory Doran, who I'd worked with before, was one of the associate directors at the RSC at the time. He claims the idea came from, I did the BBC show Who Do You Think You Are? And I went into a small church on a Scottish island, which happened to have some bones under some floorboards, and I picked up a skull.
This might be a distant relative. Meet the ancestors.
Greg claims that was the inspiration for offering me Hamlet. It was certainly something I'd always had on the kind of wish list, I suppose. One of those parts that you kind of go through drama school slightly fantasising about playing. So to do that at the Royal Shakespeare Company felt like a terrifying prospect, but one that I was not going to turn down.
You shall see anon how the murderer gets the love of Gonzaga's wife.
The king rises.
What? Frighted with false fire?
How fares my lord?
Give o'er the play. Give me some light.
There was a moment towards the end of the run in Stratford when it was mooted that we might do one of those live link-up, something that's become quite standard practice now. Certainly the Royal Shakespeare Company, the National Theatre, a lot of the theatre companies now will have these link-ups to cinemas, and they'll be filmed on stage and broadcast sort of as a live theatre event. That was quite new at the time, and for a variety of reasons, never quite that version of recording Hamlet or broadcasting Hamlet never quite got over the line. But I think because we got close to that, there was a sense that, well, it would be nice, it would be ideal to have a version of this production. So the BBC came on board, and the following year we sort of reassembled, and we found a way of kind of recreating the stage production without an audience and in a studio of sorts, with a cast who all knew what they were doing and who'd done it on stage for 100 performances. I think everyone was very keen to have a record of it and to be able to reassemble and to, because we never got to do that live cinema version, at least we had a version of it on tape. For all time to come, for good or ill.
'Tis now the very witching time of night, when churchyards yawn, and hell itself breathes out contagion to this world. Now could I drink hot blood, and do such bitter business as the day would quake to look on. Soft now, to my mother I will speak daggers to her, but use none.
One of the things with these sort of great classical roles, of course, is that you are very aware of the line of beloved actors who have gone before you. That's part of what's thrilling about it, of course, to get to sort of stand in that line, to be the sort of the torchbearer of that part for a time. Of course, it's a huge privilege, it's a huge honour, it's a huge challenge. It's a sort of Olympic event for actors, really. It's definitely the best part in the canon.
What do you read, my lord?
Words.
From an acting point of view, you get given these words that are a little bit magical. And at first they're a bit difficult because they're 400 years old and they need a bit of unlocking, and they don't necessarily immediately sit in your mouth. There's a bit of translation that you have to go through. There's a bit of work about it. And that's true from an audience's perspective as well. But there's something about those words that when you're kind of on the inside of them, and when you're in charge of them, and when it feels like for a second you've got the wheel and you're driving them rather than them driving you, there's something slightly transcendental about them. One of the things that we did, and this is quite a niche sort of, this meant quite a lot for me. I don't know if an audience would even have been aware of it most of the time, but there are two versions of Hamlet. There's the folio version of Hamlet, and there's the what is known as the bad quarto version of Hamlet. The bad quarto was the sort of pamphlet version that was published much earlier, the first version of Hamlet that was ever put through a printing press, which people think was assembled by a bunch of the actors who were in it. And therefore it seems to be quite poorly remembered. Some of the famous lines are not there, and the structure of the play is rather different. So we quite freely borrowed some of that structure. So to be or not to be, we moved around. It's not the way that it usually is received, which actually I think is better.
To be or not to be? That is the question. Whether it is nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles and by opposing end them.
Greg was very keen that we play Hamlet as a thriller. At each moment, there isn't an inevitability to how this is going to end. And Hamlet might decide to just whip out his dagger and kill Claudius, and the whole thing would end very differently. We took the interval in the theatre. We took the interval in the middle of a speech. So Patrick Stewart as Claudius was praying at the front of the stage, and I came in and saw him. Wasn't expecting to see him. There he is. And I realised I could do it right now. And now might I do it, Pat? Now he's praying. I take a dagger out and I go to stab him, and the lights went out, and that was the interval.
And now I'll do it!
We were trying to find ways of undermining the audience's expectations. If you think you know this play, it's probably the most famous play in history. You probably think you know how it ends. And yes, it probably will end that way, but if we can make you doubt that along the way, then we will do everything we can to make you think that it's just going to go a different way, that this time they might not all die at the end. Somehow everyone might live happily ever after. I was so thrilled when I heard that Patrick wanted to play Claudius. I mean, he's a sort of great Shakespearean. He's a huge star. And yet this part meant a lot to him. It was one of the first things he'd seen, I think. One of the first plays he'd seen on stage. I hope I'm not misremembering this, Patrick. And he'd always seen the Ghost and Claudius played by the same actor. That was one of the things he was very keen to do, which works brilliantly, of course.
I am thy father's spirit, doomed for a certain term to walk the night, and for the day confined to fast in fires, till the foul crimes done in my days of nature are burned and purged away.
It felt like a real coup to get him, but of course he enjoys being in a company. He enjoys being part of these plays, and having him in a rehearsal room was just a wonderful treat. But he very quickly is just one of the gang. When Hamlet comes on wearing the sort of muscle t-shirt, that I was quite keen in rehearsals that when he puts on his antic disposition, pretends to be going a bit loopy, that he would in some way sort of regress. My idea was always that he would find a Superman t-shirt in a closet, and that he'd come on wearing, so he was wearing something that he maybe had when he was younger. It was very unprincely, but it was also him slightly putting on a bit of a costume.
My uncle, father, and aunt mother are deceived.
In what, my dear lord?
I am but mad. North-northwest. When the wind is southerly. I know an orc from an Anshaw.
I argued hard for the Superman T-shirt, and I did not win. I think that might have been a licensing issue, a sense that DC Comics might not allow the Royal Shakespeare Company to do that. But also I think Greg has a sort of radar for how things might slightly overwhelm He was worried it would become the Superman Hamlet. That would be that critics looking for a sort of lazy headline might slap that over it if it was too obvious, if it was too iconic and recognisable. So the compromise we found with Rob Jones, our designer, was that we had this sort of T-shirt with a kind of a muscle vest painted on the front, which sort of did the same thing. I still miss my Superman T-shirt.
Now here's a skull, sir. I've lain you in the earth 23 years. Whose was it? Awesome mad fellow he was. Whose do you think it was?
Nay, I know not. So on the first day of rehearsals, Greg brought out a box and said, I want to introduce you to the final member of the cast. And he opens this box and brings out a skull. And this was a real human skull. And this belonged to a musician called Andrei Tchaikovsky, who had bequeathed the Royal Shakespeare Company his skull to be used in a production of Hamlet to play Yorick. Obviously, back in the day, Yorick was always played by a real human skull, and indeed, in the Royal Shakespeare Company's archives, there are several examples of such. That had fallen out of favour in recent years because skulls can be rendered in plastic or fiberglass, and that perhaps is simpler, and perhaps that's more the expectation for a modern audience and a modern company of actors. But Andrei Tchaikovsky had bequeathed his head. It had gone to the RSC and had never been used. I believe it was used in a photo shoot for a production of Hamlet many, many years previously. But when Greg found out this snippet of information, he was quite keen to deliver Andrei his parting wish. So Andrei was brought out of storage and was introduced to the company on that first day. And people had a variety of reactions to that. Some people didn't like it at all. I was not expecting this revelation, but I found it thrilling, actually.
Yes. Poor Yorick. I knew him, Horatio. A fellow of infinite jest. Of most excellent fancy. He hath borne me on his back 1,000 times.
That moment by the grave, when Hamlet discovers Yorick's skull and looks into those eyes, obviously a hugely famous passage. It's a wonderful passage. It's about mortality. It's about Hamlet recognising his own fleeting nature, the idea that we're all on this earth for the blink of an eye. And there he is looking, holding the remnants of someone who he had known as a living, breathing, vibrant human. To do that, looking into the eyes of... Now, I never knew Andrei Tchaikovsky, but I know that he was... I could read about him, I could discover him, I could look at pictures of him, and I could understand that this was a human with wants and needs and desires and expectations, and there was a humanity there. That to look into those... The actual sort of eye sockets of a once living, breathing human being meant so much more in that moment to me. It felt very vibrant and alive, and made Hamlet's words all the more poignant in that moment. So I was very thrilled that Andrei was a member of our company from the first performance right through to. I mean, he's very much featured in the film version too. I'm so grateful we did get to film it and that it exists. And of course, the experience in the theatre is very specific, and it is a play. You know, it's written for performance on a stage, and that's probably how it works best. I like that we have a record of it and that it exists, and you know, people will come up to you, kids will come up to you and say that they've been watching it in school and that they're studying it for their A levels and that they've been watching your production. And I'm glad that it lives on. Of course I am, because it was something I was hugely proud to be part of.